Now, we're going to cover chapter 22, section 3 and 4, and we're going to look at the pop culture of the 1950s.
He's suffering from catatonic shock. His injuries are minor, but right now he can't deal with the trauma of the wreck.
Golly, this is a hard decision. But I have thought about it, and I want the plug pulled. Yeah.
Ma'am, your husband's not dying. He's just taking a nap.
Listen, look at him. Look at him. I've never seen him make that noise, ever. He got more plugs in him than a circuit. Oh, baby. Mama loves you so much.
Okay, mass media. Television became huge during the 1950s. Again, with the economy being as doing as well as it was, people could afford to have televisions. People could afford to have more than one television. And more people started to stay home. Uh, there were television shows for people from all different walks of life that you could now were now being made. Variety shows, more sporting events were being shown on TV. Of course, people are going to watch the news on TV. Movies are being made specifically for TV. And speaking of movies, movie theaters were really having a hard time keeping up. People would rather stay home than go to the movies. And so in the movie industry, they had to increase or improve the methods that they were using. There was the CinemaScope, which provided for a much better viewing experience. Uh, the image on the screen was much clearer. The sound with the movies was much better. Of course, now you go to today's movies today, and you can watch them in 3D. You have surround sound. It's unbelievable what they can do. But back during this time, um, there was there were a lot of improvements that needed to be made. And then there's radio. Radio became a new form of communication. Now that they are in cars, people are going to listen to them when they're driving to work, when they're driving home from work. It's a new way to get of advertising for businesses. Radios, if you can have someone on there that's popular, if you can get a DJ that's popular, they're mainly going to be on the radio when people are driving to work. That's when the majority of people are listening to it. And so businesses are going to want to run ads when the largest number of people are listening to it. A good DJ for a radio station can generate, in today's market, literally millions of dollars. Back then, it would have been tens, maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars that you could generate, because a radio station is going to charge a business X number of dollars for an ad during a certain time. Well, if that's when during the peak listening hours, they're going to charge more during that time than they are, say, maybe between 10 and 11 o'clock at night. The amount they're going to charge isn't going to be nearly as much as it is between maybe 7 in the morning until 8:30 or 9 in the morning. And then even then on the way home, it might be the same way. And the radio just wasn't for playing music. Now you're going to have news is going to be on the radio, weather, you're going to have talk shows on the radio. And so, but radio and the movies really had to adapt to what TV was doing. TV had a major influence on the 1950s.
Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. Ladies and gentlemen, the story you are about to see is true.
It's Howdy Doody time. It's Howdy Doody time. I'm with the Howdy Do. Say Howdy Do to you. Can't let my heart take me with you. Can't let my heart make my dreams come true. Take me away, 'cause falling in love ain't very far. Not far from the
Okay, then there was the youth movement of the 1950s. One thing about rock and roll, it actually creates what's known as a generation gap. During the if you think back to the 1930s, 1940s, the 30s were consumed by the Great Depression. The 40s were mainly consumed by World War II. And so, teens didn't really have a chance to be teens during the 30s and 40s. Uh, During the 30s, there was just nothing for anyone to really go out and do. And if you were a teen, if you were 15, 16 years old in 1940, then you knew that when you turned 18, if the war wasn't over with, that's what you were going to do, that you were going to be joining the war effort. So I said teens couldn't really be teens during this time. Now we're at the 1950s, and teens can be teens. And here's another thing, and this helps contribute to the rise of juvenile delinquency. One of the main objectives of most parents when it comes to being a parent is you want the life that your kids have to be better than the life that you had. Now, when I say better, there's a lot that could go into that. Maybe you're going to want them to perform better in school, perform better academically. Maybe you're going to want to make sure that financially they're more well off. But one thing that really does often happen is that parents often will give their kids more freedoms than what they had. Well, again, let's think about parents of the 1950s. When were they kids? Because when you become a parent, you're going to reflect back on what was it like when I was a teenager? Okay, how did my parents treat me? Well, let's think about parents of the 1950s. The majority of them were teenagers during the 1930s. Well, how great were the 1930s? They weren't great. This country was going through a Great Depression. And so what happens is in the 1950s, parents start to give their kids a lot more freedoms. And teens are going to do what teens do, and that is they're gonna do what they want until they're told not to do it anymore. And then oftentimes, if they're told that they can't, especially if it's the first time they're being told that they can't, they're not going to like it, and so they are going to rebel. And so you have a sharp rise in juvenile delinquency in the 1950s. Now, the juvenile delinquency of the 1950s would pale in comparison to the juvenile delinquency of today. I don't know if any of you have ever watched the TV show Scared Straight, but it's where they take at-risk teens, and sometimes they're not even in their teens. Some of them are as young as 11, 12 years old, and the parents sign them up for a program, usually with the local sheriff's department, and they're going to go and they're going to be in jail for X number of days, and they're going to be right there with the convicts, adults that have committed adult type crimes, and it's trying to send a message to these individuals that this is not the place where you want to be. The juvenile delinquency of the 1950s, what was it that they were getting in trouble for? Staying out past curfew, listening to music they shouldn't have been listening to, um, smoking, uh, drinking. Do those things go on today? Yes, they do. But oftentimes, the juvenile delinquents of today, they're referred to as that because of the criminal aspect of what it is that they're doing. And anyway, you have this generation gap that gets created. Another thing that adds to the generation gap is um, divorce rates start to go up during the 1950s. And when it was no different back then than it is today. Sometimes you have parents that, well, they want to be the one that the kids like most, and so they allow the kids to do something because they know the other parent won't. Well, then when that parent finds out about it, then they try to do one better, and it can create a lot of um, a lot of negative lifestyles. And so kids really experience that. But the thing that probably contributed most to juvenile delinquency and also the generation gap was actually rock and roll music. Now, how did rock and roll music start? It actually starts in Cleveland, Ohio. There's a DJ by the name of Alan Freed, and Alan Freed notices that there's these kids that are standing in front of this record store and they're gathering there. And oftentimes what record stores used to do is they used to hang speakers underneath of the awning on the outside of the record store, and then they would go inside, put a record on, and then pipe the music outside. And then as individuals would walk by, they could hear the music, and if it was something that they liked, that would lure them inside to buy the record. So Alan Freed noticed these kids hanging out, so he went down to the record store and he asked, and he said, "Hey, what is it? What's this music that the kids are listening to?" So the owner of the record store, put the record on, and Alan Freed liked it. He liked the rhythm, he liked the beat, and he went back to his radio manager and he says, "Hey, we need to start playing this type of music." And it really took some coaxing. His radio manager wasn't too keen on the idea, and lo and behold, Alan Freed got the okay, and he started playing the music, and rock and roll was born. I mentioned that this happened in Cleveland, Ohio. That's why Cleveland, Ohio is where the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is at today. And it's all due to Alan Freed. Okay, this is going to bring an end to this video lecture. There's going to be one more that's going to follow this, and then that will be it.